identified, tackled the underlying causes.
My Lords, as others have explained so well, this bill presents a real dilemma. I've long argued that the BDS campaign has seeded a culture of normalising anti-Semitism, and the noble Lord Davis and I will have to disagree on what that definition might be, but one of the points about democracy is that I do agree with him on is that's the kind of debate that we need. The problem I have is that BDS is an entirely illiberal and censorious boycott campaign. But on the other hand, this legislation that aims to ban such boycotts is also illiberal and censorious. So what to do? In the broadest terms, the premise of the bill could sanction a dangerous trend of government determining in law which political campaigns are legitimate, which are not. I found the Minister's emphasis at the beginning on public authorities all speaking as one voice on foreign policy more scary than reassuring. Perhaps the Government Minister might consider the possibility, just a smidgen of a possibility, that one day the government might be in opposition and they might find themselves in public bodies that they're involved in that disagree with official foreign policy, and it's hard to know whether this bill would catch them then. But if the aim is to rein in public institutions and dabbling in contentious moral decisions beyond the scope of their core responsibilities, which certainly Michael Gove seemed to imply in what he said, ironically, one reason why investment and procurement strategies have been politicised over recent years is due to government-backed top-down directives. Just look at the way that pursuing ESG targets and adopting divisive EDI diversity criteria has distorted investment and procurement decisions, and not all for the good. So by and large, I actually think the government should stop interfering in what is and isn't invested in by autonomous public bodies. Beyond a concern about the threat to the autonomy of, for example, universities, councils and arts organisations, which I think was really well explained by the noble Lord Willits and many others, I just can't see how this bill can avoid stifling democratic debate. And we've heard powerful speeches, especially critiquing Clause 4 as a gagging clause. But the section that prohibits vice-chancellors or chief execs of arts organisations or council leaders from saying that they would support the boycott if it were lawful to, in fact, have the boycott is, in fact, really Orwellian, and that's not overusing the word. And isn't it dangerous to discourage leaders of public bodies to fail to explain their decision-making process? Surely it's in the public interest that we know the pros and cons of financial investments, or the pros and cons of why they might want to boycott and so on. So unlike some, I am not somebody who goes along with a rather unpleasant cynicism about the government's motives. I'm happy to accept that the bill has been put forward in good faith, and it's an attempt at tackling one of the sources of anti-Jewish hatred, i.e. BDS-style boycotts. But despite its intention, I think that clamping down on open discussion, which so much of this bill does, will make it more difficult to tackle anti-Semitic racism in the public sphere. Those of us who oppose BDS should hold firm that it is we, or it should be we, who are on the side of democratic free speech. In contrast, BDS is a boycott campaign whose very essence is to use regressive censorship tactics to isolate Israel economically and culturally. But note, this is not about shaming Israel or embarrassing them into taking a different policy decision. We've heard a lot, maybe it's a kind of age thing, in today's debate about the past boycott of South Africa. But that was aimed at ridding South Africa of apartheid, not of ridding the world of South Africa. The BDS movement, however, aims to rid the world of a Zionist state, i.e. to eradicate Israel. And that's what, as people have called for evidence, their founders say, and much of their literature. I actually think that I get why the government might focus on trying to find a way of curtailing BDS. Today's boycott culture is pretty grim. I've recently encountered those abusive, rather vicious protests outside the Zara shop or McDonald's, where I've been told not to enter, or it would mean that I was endorsing genocide, not to buy the burgers and so on. I think it's scary that so many of those young protesters have no qualms about mirroring the Nazi tactic of blocking Jewish services and businesses from the 1930s with their "Don't buy from the Jews" slogans. I think BDS campaigns have certainly created a boycott culture when it comes to anyone associated with Israel being treated in a cavalier, cruel and prejudicial way. The terrible instance the other day of the young Israeli swimming champion being booed and jeered. Gary Lineker, a leading BBC pundit, quite casually going along with the BDS demand to kick the Israel football team out of FIFA and so on. I'm all for a robust response to this ugly mood, but this proposed legislation follows a worrying trend. That is to create criminalising laws as a substitute for political courage in taking on contemporary challenges. And so I want to ask the Minister, is the problem that the government seeks to tackle a plethora of university senates using BDS schemes to avoid investing in Israel? Hardly. But there is a huge problem in a spike of anti-Semitic abuse targeting Jewish students, as described so vividly by Lord Mann, and often, by the way, leaders of those public institutions looking away. And consider the shameful experience at Birmingham University of a Jewish chaplain who's been driven off campus into hiding after returning from military service fighting Hamas. And beyond these visceral attacks, don't let's forget that too many in academia have cultivated the intellectual justification for anti-Jewish attitudes amongst the young by propagating decolonisation ideology and critical race theory, so branding Jews as the embodiment of white privilege, Israel is the epitome of a colonial settler state, and therefore fair game for righteous hatred. And how will the bill's restrictions deal with that, or arts organisations tackling the most pernicious cultural boycotts, such as cancelling of Israeli artists, whether the London Theatre that pulled the plug on the Jewish Film Festival, or the cancellation of the Israeli hip-hop opera Edinburgh Fringe, or the bullying that goes on of high-profile artists who have the temerity to announce that they're going to gig in Tel Aviv or whatever. But this bill won't make an iota of difference. And I want to just finish, I suppose, by one story of the nightclub owner who basically closed down his nightclub last week, Jewish nightclub owner, having received a package addressed to a Zionist child killer with children's clothes drenched in fake blood. But the final straw was the threat to boycott the club. I just think this bill will make no difference. I'm delighted, by the way, to have found so many free speech allies in this House. Suddenly, everybody on the side of free speech. It's not been something I've experienced in the years that I've been here, only in defending BDS. But nonetheless, I don't want to betray that free speech by agreeing with the government that we should clamp down on it just because I want to fight anti-Semitism.
My lords, when I was a child, we always had great